Apartheid. The former political system in South Africa in which only white people had full political rights and other people, especially black people, were forced to live away from these white people. The National Party took power over the South Africans, which was the deluge of decades of oppression from the Europeans who settled there in South Africa. Due to the constant oppression and power imbalance, there was a large defiance campaign, which launched in 1952, which was the first widespread resistance campaign in South Africa. And through this, they drafted the Freedom Charter in 1955. The Freedom Charter of 1955 was a wide list of desires and goals that the Defiance Campaign, and more so Nelson Mandela, wanted to achieve with their resistance. While what Nelson Mandela and the Defiance Campaign laid out in the Freedom Charter was a good basis for what's next to come for South Africa, I believe to a low extent the anti-apartheid movement achieved the goals set out in the Freedom Charter. In this video, I'll be laying out 3 of the goals that were mentioned in the Freedom Charter and see how they panned out for Africa from the implementation in 1955 all the way to Nelson Mandela's eventual arrest in 1964. The first goal I'm going to talk about in this video is all shall enjoy equal rights. For what this is, it's a very good base work for what the Defiance Campaign wanted to do with the South Africans who were already there. However, despite this, there are still forced relocations in town still. Once again, discrimination with laws that were already set prior. An act that ultimately undermined this whole goal was the Bantu Self-Government Act of 1959. This created ethnic homelands for the Bantu people, as well as stripping away their native South African people away from their citizenship. Doing this only alienated the black South Africans who were already there, and this made them feel disillusioned with their place in not only their country, but also their world if they were not allowed to have the same freedoms as people who had came there as ancestors. The second goal that I want to discuss is there shall be houses, security, and comfort. This is honestly another good base work. If you're able to be free in your own country, why not be able to live and work and survive as one of the people there? However, the Group Areas Act of 1950 ultimately undermined this. While the Group Areas Act of 1950 was made prior to this, it ultimately made it easier to justify what was going on with them in the present. And by the present, I mean 1955 all the way up to 1964. The Group Areas Act only hammered down on the forced removal in places such as Johannesburg and Cape Town, and moved them to the outskirts of these cities so they could be alienated once again from the people that they're supposed to call home. An event that ultimately undermines this goal is the destruction of Sophiatown. Sophiatown was a vibrant hub for black culture, which was demolished from 1955 to 1956, and the people there were moved to Meadowlands in Soweto. The Meadowlands were a township just outside of Soweto. The goals of these townships were to make the black South Africans feel alienated from the white South Africans, as they would not be able to have the same freedoms, the same facilities as the white South Africans were able to have. The third and final goal I want to talk about in this video is there shall be peace and friendship. Now, listening to this goal, it seems rather arbitrary, as peace and friendship is largely self-determined. Something that ultimately undermines this is the treason trials that were held between 1956 and 1961 for leaders who adopted the Freedom Charter. Eventually sending them to prison doesn't really lay a good base work for friendship and peace amongst everyone. Another major event that ultimately undermines this peace and friendship is also something that undermines the goals of the Freedom Charter as a whole, which is the Sharpeville Massacre that happened March 21st, 1960. This came from a peaceful protest organized by the Pan-African Congress to burn their passbooks. Passbooks were these books that controlled where the black South Africans live and where they work. Thousands of people gathered outside the Sharpeville police station to burn these passbooks to try to gain a sense of freedom. However, the police did not take lightly to this. The police aimed their guns and fired at the congregation, killing 69 people and injuring dozens. The Sharpeville Massacre is very indicative of a general fear of an uprising, or a fear of just a sense of community and congregation that the white South Africans wanted to remove completely. Nelson Mandela's eventual arrest in 1962 boosted initial awareness and international awareness, but the damage was unfortunately already done. The 3 points that I mentioned all sought to do something good and likely had greater intentions. However, in some instances, these were too arbitrary and rather wistful, as they didn't really outline some sort of concrete goal in how they could achieve these sort of goals. And through Nelson Mandela's arrest, he eventually became a symbol. He became the face of a movement, and despite being in prison, he had a lot of influence for how the movement was to go forward. Despite the good intentions, there was a low extent to the power that the Freedom Charter actually had on improving the lives of the Black South Africans. In conclusion, while the Freedom Charter was a great basework for what the Defiance campaign wanted to set out to do to try to liberate the Black South Africans, it was ultimately a little too arbitrary and didn't really set a fine line to what they really wanted from the movement.